Hi, Grandma here, and I'm beginning the book Herodotus and the Road to History by Jeanne Bendick. And first I want you to look at the picture on the cover. Can you tell what the time period is? Okay, we're going to turn to the picture on the back. Can you tell here when this takes place? Not Roman. No, it's Greek. And then when we open the book, we see the chapters. I am Herodotus. I grow up. My travels begin to the north. And it goes on like that where it goes to different places. And so I think this is going to be a little bit like a biography. In the back, if you need to look, are some names of places which tell you what they were called back then and what they are called today. So, for instance, the Black Sea was called the Euxine, the Euxine. What I thought was interesting is the 10 islands, Tin, are now what we call the British Isles. And then we also have a brief glossary of people, everything from Aesop to Xerxes. He has 2 X's in his name. And then we have measurements. And the measurements tell that a finger was 3/4 of an inch, a foot was 16 fingers. A drachma weighed 0.15 ounce. A talent weighed 57 pounds. And the unit of money was the obol. 6 obols made a drachma. So we're going to begin with the author's preface. And the author's preface usually tells why somebody has written the book and why they're interested in it. Herodotus was born 2,500 years ago. What year is this now? Well, it's 2021. So that means he was born during what we call BC. So he was born like 250 BC. In the Greek town of Halicarnassus on the Asian coast of now what is called Turkey, he lived in a time in Greece when myth and legend, told in song and poetry, were considered history. I was an English major in school, and so I studied a lot of these types of history, as they called it. One of them was the Odyssey, and the other was the Iliad. There was a time when people thought that the Iliad was not factual. But in the 1800s, an archaeologist found Troy and found that many of the stories in the Iliad were true. And these stories started out being just stories that people told. They weren't written down. And that's what they say next. He lived in a time in Greece when myth and legend told in song and poetry were considered history. But there was no Greek word for history as we define it now, a record of the human past. As far as we know, Herodotus wrote the first such record of this kind, springing from the pure thirst for knowledge. It was not only the first history, it was the first long work in prose, ordinary language, meaning it was the first long piece written that was not poetry, and it was written as people talked, not in a legal or a very formal way, but just in a way that people could understand. Herodotus described his writing as a history, which was the Greek word for inquiry, which meant finding out. You could call finding out the theme of Herodotus' life. He had a fever for inquiring that was unique, even among the always curious Greeks. He wanted to see things for himself, even if it meant going to the ends of the known earth. To put myself in Herodotus' sandals, I had to become a detective. Most of what we know about his inquiries and his travels comes from his own writing, his histories. And by the way, I looked up on Amazon, and you can still buy his books that he wrote. So if you're really curious, maybe you can get some out of the library. But what about the everyday world he lived in? What was it like to be a Greek in the 5th century BC? Even Herodotus, an extraordinary Greek, lived in a day-to-day world. What did he do when he was growing up? What did he study? What did he eat? What did he wear? What was his house like in his town? What did he look like? What did people he wrote about look like? What made him set out to explore the world? I have drawn a number of maps so you can follow Herodotus in his travels and in the history he describes. They also let you compare his places with our world today. Over all these centuries, the places are the same, though they may have different names. I have used modern place names, but a page at the back of the book shows you what those places were called in Herodotus' time. When speaking as Herodotus, I've also used modern measurements instead of the ones used in his time. You can compare those at the back of the book too. Traveling in Herodotus' time was difficult and dangerous. Usually he went by boat. But what were the boats like? Was a boat on the Nile different from a Phoenician trader? Of course, putting myself in Herodotus' sandals took guesswork and imagination, but it also took research. Ancient Greek paintings and poetry show and tell vivid stories. So do portraits and sculptures of the people Herodotus wrote about. The ancient Egyptians painted pictures of their lives and told about them in symbols called hieroglyphs. The Persians carved pictures of triumphs and described them in their own cuneiform writing. And we'll see some examples of that in a little bit. Over the 100 generations since Herodotus lived, archaeologists have slowly discovered and recovered much of what we know now about the world he lived in. And many historians after him have added their own pieces to the puzzle using many sources. I have imagined a particular life 2,500 years ago. Herodotus was a person of his own time. He wasn't every person, though. Herodotus was unique, doing something no one had ever done before. He was looking for a new way to explain the nature of things and to record his ideas about why they happened, and he wrote it all down. And so begins our first chapter. That was the author telling, and she wrote from Connecticut in July 2009. So she wrote this almost 20 years ago. I am Herodotus. My name is Herodotus. Some people call me the father of history. Some people call me the world's greatest traveler. Some unkind people call me the father of lies, but they haven't been to all the places I have been, or seen all the sights I have seen, or listened to all the stories I have heard. I am a Greek, born in the city-state of Halicarnassus, at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. A city-state is just what it sounds like, a city that rules itself and the lands around it. Halicarnassus is on the Asian shore of the sea, and when I was born, it had been part of the Persian Empire for 60 years. But that didn't matter to us. We still considered ourselves Greek. Well, it's a little bit like around St. Patrick's Day, a lot of people call themselves Irish when they aren't. They really live in the United States, but their family has treasured the Irish ways. They eat food that's from Ireland, and they like to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. So you can be an American citizen and still be Irish. Well, He's Greek, even though he is technically part of the Persian Empire. Now, they have a map in the book that shows you a little bit about it, so here is the Mediterranean Sea, part of it. Here's Greece over here, but over here is Asia, and Halicarnassus is down here. It's a part of Turkey. I've blown it up a little bit to where it's a little bit bigger. I don't know if you can see. And it is in what is today called Turkey. The Greeks were scattered all around the Mediterranean Sea. We Ionian Greeks lived on the Asian shore and on islands along that shore. There were other Greek city-states such as Thebes and Corinth and Athens and Sparta on the European mainland. We lived around our sea like frogs around a pond. We weren't really a nation at all, just a collection of scattered city-states. Some were small, some bigger and more powerful, each making its own laws and ruling itself in its own way, a little bit like our states are. And we do have one city-state, and that's Washington, D.C. It's a city, but it does not belong to a state. It is its own state. Okay, each city-state considered itself superior to the others, and there was quarreling, even war among us. We were cut off from one another by water or by mountains. Still, we all spoke the same language, worshipped the same gods, and kept the same customs. We were all Greeks. People who were not Greeks were considered barbarians. The Persian Empire was the greatest power in the world. It stretched across Asia to India in the east, across Europe to Italy in the west, from the Black Sea to the north, across the Mediterranean Sea down to Egypt in the south. Still, we scattered Greeks managed to defeat the mighty Persians. How did we do that? I'll tell you how we did it, but that's only part of the story. Let's begin at the beginning. So I have this map, and it shows you basically all of this was part of the Persian Empire. There's Italy, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, the Black Sea up here. So all of this area belonged to the Persian Empire. And actually, the Persian Empire went all the way to India, which this map doesn't have. So it was a very large empire. Okay, here's a picture in here of the Persian Empire. And here's a picture down here that shows you what it looks like today, what countries are covered today. Okay, chapter 2, I Grow Up. Halicarnassus was a busy and interesting place to grow up in. People from other Greek city-states lived there. So did Persians from around the empire. By the way, Persians today, Persia is Iran. From all around the Mediterranean Sea. When I was growing up, it seemed like it was the center of the world. Halicarnassus is shaped like half a giant soup bowl. At the bottom of the bowl is the harbor, crowded with ships from all over the Mediterranean Sea. Near the harbor is the agora, which is the giant market where food and goods from everywhere are sold and traded. The theaters, the law courts, and other gathering places are here too. Rising up around the bowl are people's houses. Poor people, tradesmen, and craftsmen live toward the bottom. Rich and important people live higher on the hill. My parents, Lixus and Drio, were part of one of the most important families. My cousin, Panuasis, was a famous poet, and we were close in family relationships to Artemisia, the tyrant of Halicarnassus. Tyrant is our way of saying all-powerful ruler. Artemisia was also famous because she was the woman commander of a Persian ship during the wars. Artemisia came home from the wars when I was about 4 years old. When I was very young, I spent most of my time with my mother and family slaves. We Greeks and Persians really depend on our slaves. Some are prisoners, captured in wars or by pirates. Some are people who cannot pay their debts. Some are children of slaves.